Welcome to Dan and Brandon's as of yet unnamed podcast.
Hi, everybody.
This is Brandon and Dan.
We're making a podcast.
We decided that I have to sit here and sign lots and lots of pages. And Dan is kind enough to keep me company. And we like to talk. This is something that the two of us share.
Yes.
We enjoy the sound of our voices and others' voices, each other's voices. And so we thought we would talk on a podcast.
Yeah.
But we can't name it. We have no idea what to name.
Yeah, so because we are, we have more than a decade as award-winning professional podcasters, we came into this with no prep whatsoever.
I prepped. I just can't decide on.
Oh, so
on
you have some names?
Oh, I have names. So I thought we would probably spend a lot of time talking about pop culture.
Okay.
So I thought, hey, the word popcorn could work in it. So pop culture popcorn. And then my wife said pop culture pops, or was that might have been someone else, that because we're both dads and we'll likely make lots of terrible jokes. So popcorn pops, pop culture pops, or pop culture popcorn. That's a lot of pops. And nobody I told that to thought it was good.
No, nobody liked that?
Yes. Everyone's like, eh.
See, my brain always goes to the portmanteau word. And so I want to say Popcornture. Even though that's, like, empirically terrible.
That sounds terribad. If you guys don't know what I'm referencing, one of my favorite stories from Dan ever is the Terribad story.
Was it I can't remember if it was Terribad or Stubad.
Oh, it was Stubad. You're right. It was Stubad. Yeah.
One of the jobs that I had, which actually is a company that I loved working for. I was a senior writer at this startup company, and they were trying to do all this stuff. It was Utah, and so it was an MLM for a while. I mean, it still is as far as I know, but I don't work there. They came up with some word, which I can't remember.
Oh, I can. It was you had this, you told me about this. They had this big meeting where the executive had come up with
the CEO, the owner of the company.
Yeah, that they had trademarked already. He said, our products are all going to be safe-effective.
That's right, safe-effective.
Because they're safe and effective.
Oh, man. And as far as I know, now that I'm no longer working there in a senior position and capable of killing it, for all I know, they're using that word now. And
now they're all going to Google safe-effective and know.
And they're going to say, who's safe-effective? So, yeah, they talked all about safe-effective. And I said, I think that's a really Stubad idea.
I bet they loved you at
you know
that
what?
company.
They actually did. One of my roles that I had in that company was the guy that everyone likes and can tell people that they're wrong without offending them.
You were the court jester.
I kind of was. Yeah.
That fits you quite well.
I was the social lubricant of that company. And if somebody needed to tell the vice president or whoever, that's a terrible idea, or we're going to go in a different direction with the magazine, I was the one to bear the bad news because I could get away with anything. It was a very nice...
Everybody loves Dan.
Dennis the Menace kind of job.
Which is really weird because you do write... The number of people they've said, Dan is so nice to me, because they're shocked, or they're like, I can't believe how nice a person he is, because they've heard about you.
And my books are all so dark. Well, not all of them, but...
No. Back then in particular, when you started...
I was describing our current collaboration, Dark One Forgotten, to James Sutter just this morning. And he's like, that does not sound in the least bit like a Brandon book. But I can understand why you're working with him, because it totally sounds like a Dan book. Because it's all about, like, serial killers and supernatural monsters. And
you have made me interested in this stuff. I was not the least bit interested in serial killers till you wrote a really interesting book series about them. And then I started watching the occasional true crime thing and stuff like that. And I blame you. You have warped me. You are this innocent, kindly, joking man who turns people into serial killer addicts.
Turns people, yeah. And boy, and I'm not the only one. When we started working on Dark One Forgotten, I had never listened to any of the murder podcasts.
Yeah.
And so I went out and I listened to season 1 of Serial, and I listened to all these other things. I listened to one called Paper Ghosts, a bunch of different ones, and they're just everywhere. My word. Like Saturday Night Live a couple weeks ago had a whole song about women who watch murder shows. And I'm like, okay, well, this is clearly more of a cultural movement than I realized it was.
I really liked Serial when I listened to it, and I think that kicked off a lot of this to people.
Great. It's hard, honestly, to watch or listen to some of the other ones because so many of them tend to get very breathless and very melodramatic. Like, I'm going to play you this footage, but it is quite honestly very disturbing.
Right, and it's like Paranormal Activity, where it's like, look how disturbing this is, and then like a salt shaker tips over. Like, oh!
Everyone says, oh no!
Yeah.
But Serial, it has such a wonderful kind of self-deprecating tone to it, where she is inserting herself not as part of the story, but as this goofy reporter who's trying to get good audio and driving around in her car and can't find the right place. And, you know, not that she comes across as incompetent in any way. She's an incredible reporter.
Yeah.
But her voice is so much more approachable than so many of the other murder shows.
For those who don't know, the Dark One Forgotten, the thing we're writing, is kind of in the Dark One universe, which I have a graphic novel that came out about. And I wanted to do a fake version of Serial for that universe, something like Serial.
Such a brilliant idea. Dark One has a supernatural serial killer in it. And one of the kind of two main stories it's telling is the trial of this guy, which means that he's caught at the beginning.
Yes, the book starts with him having been captured.
So we're doing a prequel novella, but rather than a novella, it is 6 episodes of a murder podcast detailing how this person is tracked down and caught. And it's been a delight to write. I do a lot of script writing. I've done all this audio stuff with my Zero books. And so taking that skill set that I've developed and then turning it towards my old love of serial killers, it's just been fun.
You know, we are very off topic. This is going to happen a lot, listeners. Maybe we should call our podcast Stubad.
Stubad.
That is probably the worst title for a podcast.
You know what?
Anyone has ever come up with. That can be its secret name, listeners.
Stubad.
The Stubad podcast.
Off topic. The Stubad podcast.
Oh, off topic isn't bad.
Someone's got to already have a podcast called Off Topic, right?
If nobody has a podcast named Off Topic, that is what we're doing.
I'm looking that up right now. Okay, I typed Off Topic, and the first thing that came up was, I think the phone heard me. Off Topic podcast. Yep, there's a podcast called Off Topic. It's already on Apple Podcasts.
Oh well, that's a good title. Good for them. Smart person came up with a great idea for a podcast title.
We could call it "Look, Ma, I Made a Podcast." That's a Stubad idea.
So Adam suggested "Nerds" with exclamation points.
Based on the Guards by Terry Pratchett.
Yes.
Which Nerds. I like that.
Yeah, it's better than mine. The problem is, like, all podcasts are nerds now, right? Like, the word nerd basically doesn't mean anything anymore. Right? Like, I feel like it's a word that has been oversaturated in the market, so to speak.
It has been, which is why I typically use geek.
Yeah, but even geek. Like, there's so many geek-focused podcasts and things. I would rather something a little more different than that.
Well, the good news is I just looked up Nerds, and there's not already a podcast called that. Or at least it doesn't show up on page 1 of Google, which might be valuable. What are some other euphemisms for nerd?
Well, I don't know if we want to go there, though, because, like, yes, we're nerds, but I don't think that's actually the selling point of our podcast, right?
That's true.
I know a lot of nerdy people, and among all of them, you and I are among the less nerdy, I feel, right? Like we do not have.
That is probably true.
Like,
I say, you got to remember when he says this, we write science fiction and fantasy books for a living. I'm a professional game master, and yet in our social circle, we are among the least nerdy people.
Yeah. Like
when I go to church, hands down, I'm the nerdiest guy there.
Oh yeah. I lived with multiple Jenningses.
Of Ken Jennings fame.
Ken Jennings fame. And those guys, I mean, you want Simpson quotes. You want to be told at length the history of some very small minutia. You can ask a Jennings, and a Jennings will tell you. One of my favorite things about knowing Ken and Nathan was we have a mutual friend and other former roommate named Earl.
Earl is so great.
Yeah, Earl is awesome. And Earl actually went to Jeopardy to try out with Ken at the same time. And
really?
Ken got a callback, and Earl never did. And it really kind of bothered him because he thought he'd done well on the test and stuff. So eventually he went to a taping with Ken because, for those who don't know, Ken won like all the Jeopardy. And Earl's like, well, what's up? He actually asked him. Or no, he didn't even ask. He just went and they saw him. They're like, oh, hey, you might be interested to know this. You passed the test to be on Jeopardy. But because of conflicts of interest and, certain things, we can't put two former roommates on an episode together.
Oh.
That makes perfect sense if you think about it. And they only keep your results for a test for a season. You have to apply again at the start of a new season.
Oh, so Ken was just so successful, Earl never got a chance.
He never got a chance because Ken went the whole season. And so all the results. And so they're like, yeah, you would have been on if Ken hadn't won all the Jeopardy, which is both, if Earl had gotten the callback, they did all sorts of quiz show stuffs in college together and things like that. So, but regardless, one of my favorite moments of being around some Jenningses is it feels like to me, maybe I'm viewing this wrong, but that in normal day parlance, people like them underclock themselves.
Yes.
In order to interact with mere mortals like us, they leave it just a little bit above normal parlance, normal conversation. But when you saw the three of them get together, suddenly the overclocking came off, and you saw their brains work at this kind of resonant level beyond what I could even catch. And they would, instead of, here's a Simpsons quote from an episode here's a Simpsons quote that was referenced in another show wrong, and someone else is responding with 3 words to some other quote that references some Greek philosopher, and they just start going, and they're all laughing and telling jokes of which only 1 or 2 words are leaving their mouths before everyone else is laughing in the trio. Mm-hmm. And I had never felt like I had met an alien species more than I did in that moment where I realized, oh, I do not know what's happening here, and I can barely follow this.
Yeah, I remember more than one conversation with Nathan Jennings where I always got the impression he was waiting for me to catch up. Yep. You know? And that's just what it's like talking to him.
And we're not that. What are we, Dan?
Who are we? Slower paced. I don't know what we are.
We're storytellers.
We are storytellers.
That's really what we are. People get that mixed up. They think that I'm going to be into trivia or things like that, or minutia, or whatnot, where I don't care.
Well, and a lot of science fiction and fantasy fans are.
Yes.
Because of that. It attracts that personality type.
And there's nothing, I enjoy listening to other people talk about their fascinations and expertises. I watch a lot of YouTube videos of people who get very nerdy into a topic that I don't know much about. It's actually really helpful for me because I'm a storyteller and I want to know what people are passionate about. I want to understand why they're passionate about it, and I want to be able to explore that in my stories. That's who I am.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if there's a pun we can make on culture.
Yes.
If we go for a more biological, growing a culture in a dish kind of idea.
Oh, that's not bad.
There's something to be done there.
See, I was going a different direction, looking at like the storyteller thing. Dan and Brandon's story time. But we don't want it, we don't want people to assume that we're going to sit around and tell them stories that are relevant. We're not going to sit here and do a scripted podcast. We are going to we are going to jabber together about things we find amusing.
Storytellers who don't tell stories is kind of a terrible name.
Yes,
as well.
So we're really good at terrible podcast names, is what I'm discovering.
Oh boy. I was terrible at titles for the longest time too.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember that.
I do remember that now.
With so many bad ones.
I actually hadn't remembered that because you tend to be pretty good at them now.
I had to teach myself how to be good at them.
I was not that great either. Like my 5th book that never got published that I've talked to people about is called the 6th Incarnation of Pandora, which is just an awful name, even before Pandora got overused.
But it sounds like a fantastic metal song.
Yeah. And Elantris, a lot of people don't know that I originally called that Adonis.
Anyone who has your special edition, anniversary edition, knows that because
you wrote
I wrote it in the introduction.
So this is my debut novel. Dan and I started a writing group in our college careers, near the end of our college careers, soon into our friendship. We started a little writing group, and the first thing we were going to workshop is my most recent unpublished fantasy novel, which I had named The Spirit of Adonis. Now, Adonis, I had not connected to the book, the actual Greek mythological figure, because I was saying the word Adonis, and I had built the whole language around this idea of what we call the aeons, which are like little morphemes that are like, two long vowel sounds. I'm like, oh, Ado, that's a cool one. It has I would eventually use it again in Adonalsium, which is part of the Cosmere and stuff. And I'm like, I just like that sound. So Ado something, Adoness. I'll call it Adonis. And then I sent the early books to Dan and the group, and I still remember meeting together, and I think it was Ben's office on campus.
That makes sense.
And we're like, we're going to discuss I actually sent the whole book. We didn't know how to do workshops.
Yeah, we were terrible at it.
We sent the whole book.
It wasn't the first session either. It was like the 3rd or 4th one when I'm finally like, okay, when is the Greek stuff going to show up?
Yeah.
And you had no idea what I meant.
Yeah, I was completely flat-footed, and it took me like minutes. Like it was probably seconds, but it felt like minutes to catch up and be like, Adonis. Oh no! But even the fact that I called it, I changed it to Elantris very quickly after that. But even then, I still called it The Spirit of Elantris, which is a way worse title than just Elantris.
Yeah.
And so.
Well, it was Moshe that cut that out, right?
Yeah.
So Brandon's editor that bought that book was Moshe Feder, and fixed his title. He also bought my first book, which I did not at the time have a title because I hadn't come up with one. But the file was called I Am Not a Serial Killer because that was my really kind of blunt force trauma description of what the book was about. And Moshe's like, no, that's the great title. You have to keep that. So he taught us both how to title things.
Yeah. Still, I have troubles sometimes. Once in a while, a title comes to me. Like The Way of Kings, I named before I wrote the book, years before I wrote the book.
Yeah.
I just came up with this thing. It felt like path and way are used a lot in various Asian languages. Do in Korean means the path of or the way of. So Taekwondo, that's where what that do is meaning and things like that. And so the idea of the path of or the way of is just it's a phrase I like. And I thought The Way of Kings. What would a book called The Way of Kings be about? It'd probably be some sort of treatise like Machiavelli's The Prince. And for years I was thinking about that and eventually wrote a book where The Way of Kings is a book in The Way of Kings.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it was Dragonsteel, wasn't it? Or was it something else in which they referenced a book called The Way of Kings?
No, it was actually The Way of Kings. Dragonsteel had Dalinar in it and the Bridgeman. So you knew them before the book happened, but it didn't have The Way of Kings, I don't think. Maybe some fans going to be like, Brandon, you once again don't know your own books.
maybe.
Do you get that? Do you get fans asking you questions and you go off on something, they're like, that's not what's in the book. And then you realize that you changed it in like the 5th draft and your brain still thinks it's the first draft?
Still remembers the first draft.
Yeah.
I will occasionally get that. The big time for me when I realized I had no idea what my own world building was when we were making the serial killer movie. And I had this big meeting where I sat down with the director and the producer, and I think they had Toby Froud, the effects guy, on the phone, and they're like, okay, explain to us how the monster works. And I said, I don't know. Okay, but like, you've got some chapters where the old man turns into a monster. Is the monster like coming out of him, or is he shape-shifting like a werewolf, or what's going on? And I said, I don't know.
You know, I think Christopher Lloyd still bears a little bit of a grudge against you. Because when I saw him in the green room, I mentioned the movie.
Oh, really?
Yes. And he's like, oh, yeah, I froze on that movie or something like that. He was very nice. He's super nice.
Cold.
But I think that there might be some latent, like what he remembers of that movie is that author made me freeze.
And as cold as he was, the rest of us were freezing. So there's a scene, if you've seen the movie, where the main character goes up and he finds the old man, who, spoiler warning, is a monster, like in the middle of the night in front of a truck, and he's like, trying to kill him with his claws and whatever. And so this was about 1 a.m. in like absolute nowhere, Michigan. And it was freezing. It was like 30 or 40 degrees below zero. I am not exaggerating. And all of us were outside. The victim was laying on the floor in just a light jacket, laying on the street in a light jacket covered with fake blood. So he was wet and cold. And we filmed as much of it as we could. And then Christopher Lloyd is sitting in a car with the engine running so the heater can be on. And when it's time for him to do a scene, we go, Mr. Lloyd, come on out. And he would come out and he would do a scene. And then he'd go back and he'd sit in the car while the rest of us would point hair dryers at this poor guy on the floor so he wouldn't die of hypothermia.
Hair dryers. That's amusing.
Hair dryers and blankets.
Maybe we should call our podcast Christopher Lloyd Does Not Like the Cold. Is that worse than the others? Is that the worst of the night?
What he specifically said to me was, never write a scene like that again. And that would be a delightful name for a podcast.
Never write a scene like that again. That is not bad.
Though that does, again, kind of imply that this is going to be a writing podcast.
That's true. And it's kind of long. Our producer is sitting in the corner being like, don't do a long one.
Don't call it
that, please.
How about intentionally blank?
Intentionally blank. That's not bad, actually.
It's short.
Uh-huh.
And it says what we're trying to say.
Yes. What if we called our podcast Bad at Titles? That wouldn't we are bad at titles.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, we are. And the fact, the thing I love about this, ironically, is that we are inviting so much criticism on ourselves.
Yes.
I had originally called the 3rd John Cleaver book Full of Holes, and our mutual friend Jancy Patterson talked me out of that one because she's like, every review of it is going to talk about how the plot is full of holes. Like, you can't just pitch that ball right across the plate.
Oh, I got one for you, Dan. Do you know what the second Stormlight book's original title was?
Ooh, I'm excited.
Oh, this is so for those who don't know, the Stormlight Archive, like the idea that it's an archive is that all the books have an in-world book in the book, right? I heard you like books, dog, so I put a book in your book.
Yeah.
And so I wanted an in-world book for each of them. And I had this really cool idea for an in-world kind of religious text where it was blank and you filled it with your knowledge. And the book could never be finished because the knowledge of the world could never contain it. And so the idea, the whole philosophy in this religious order was that they were trying to find all the knowledge, knowing they could never find all of it. And the book that they had was called The Book of Endless Pages. And my title for Words of Radiance was Book of Endless Pages until Moshe said, Brandon, you can't call a 1,000-page epic fantasy book that people already mock for being too long. The Book of Endless Pages. You just cannot. It will be a meme too quickly.
That's too bad because it's a fantastic title.
Isn't it?
You need to do like a short story set in the world and call it the Book of Endless Pages. And then it's like 5 pages long. So it's like reversing the joke.
Oh, man. That's, we could call our podcast the Podcast of Endless Pages. Because as referenced, I am sitting here signing pages while we do this.
Yeah.
And I am signing a ton of these.
And I have seen like the full line of pages, and it is emotionally daunting just to look at. So there's a lot of them.
Yeah, I hope this doesn't show up on the podcast. Do you want to talk the Snyder Cut for a little while?
You know, we should absolutely talk about the Snyder Cut, because here's why. I have not seen the original Justice League, and I have not seen the Snyder Cut, and yet I have so many opinions about its creation and existence.
Ooh, I want to hear.
So, like, it's the most expensive indie film ever made, right? The thing is that movies are innately and inherently collaborative, and that's part of the whole purpose of them.
Right. It's the big difference between what we do and what they do.
Yeah.
Is we generally are solitary scribes in a corner somewhere writing down our ideas. And when a film works, it works really well because a lot of creative people get together.
A lot of people get together.
And when they fail, it's because a lot of people with different ideas get together and it doesn't mesh.
Yeah, and you have that kind of written by committee, look at this weird platypus kind of thing. And in books, we've got this phenomenon where somebody is too important to be edited.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, the circumstances behind Snyder leaving the Justice League movie are tragic and terrible, and I don't want to say anything about that because he did what he had to do.
It feels like a bit of a jerk move on the part of whoever was putting that behind, was going on behind the scenes, right? Because they obviously wanted a different movie than he was making.
Yeah.
And it feels a little, now knowing, it feels exploitative that they're like, ooh, he has a personal tragedy. This is a good chance.
This is our chance to push him out.
We're going to push him out and make a Marvel movie instead.
Yeah, and if that's what happened, then yeah, somebody needs their knuckles slapped pretty hard. But the idea now that HBO is like, sure, how much money do you want? Like, how? I don't even know. Is it $400 million?
No, they gave him like an extra 80 or something. Like
$80 million.
We'd have to look up that.
Which is,
don't tell us that it's 70 or whatever in the comments. But they didn't give him an extra 400.
So to go back and then full creative control, I can't even think.
He did
outside
it for free.
Outside of maybe George Lucas,
Mm-hmm.
I can't even think of another massive budget movie that had all creative control in one person's hands. That is, from an artistic point of view, endlessly fascinating to me.
Right. I mean, the closest you're going to get to that is Kill Bill.
Oh, Tarantino.
The closest you're going to get to that is Tarantino, but those are mid-budget films, really. If you're going to look at big budget, like, this is a fascinating artifact. It's so interesting that it happened.
Yeah, and so... And like I said, I haven't seen it, so I don't actually know. Like, I've seen Man of Steel. He did Man of Steel, didn't he?
He did Man of Steel, yes.
And it is clear from that and from the other DC movies that, you know, the Snyder vision of superheroes is in many ways the exact opposite of Marvel, right?
Yeah.
Marvel is, here's regular people who suddenly have incredible powers and have to deal with them. And Snyder's version of superheroes that we see through Man of Steel and all these others is, here are these godlike, incredible beings
that
who
is
are
enhanced in the Snyder Cut.
Above and beyond us.
Yeah.
Kind of forced to live among us, even though they will never belong.
So I have thoughts on this too. I really think Zack Snyder is interesting. And this is odd because I don't actually like any of the films. Right? I don't like Man of Steel. I actively dislike Batman versus Superman, don't like Justice League, kind of like the new one.
Okay, the Snyder Cut works for you.
Works for me.
Okay.
It is better.
It is enjoyable.
It is enjoyable, but partially because of the author behind the scenes watching all of this happen.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say that I like any of these films, despite the fact that I really like a lot of the performances, right? Like I really like Henry Cavill as Superman. I really like Batfleck. And he's better in the new one. But I think he's, I think they have some really, Jason Momoa is very talented. And I really like Gal Gadot.
Aquaman, and I love Wonder Woman.
Right, I do love the Wonder Woman movie.
Those neither of those are Snyder movies, but they are part of the Snyder aesthetic.
But I don't like these movies, but I'm fascinated by them because of what you just mentioned, Zack Snyder. So I would rather have Zack Snyder making these movies than them made by committee, even though the movies aren't for me.
Yes.
Right? Because they have a really interesting vision. They're an interesting take on the characters. And I think he has a fascinating aesthetic, right? But what I don't like, so maybe I'm reading too much into this, but Zack Snyder's an objectivist, right? This is a philosophy.
Kind of Ayn Rand.
Yeah,
okay.
Ayn. I think her name was said Ayn.
Ayn, you're right.
And he has said things before about that philosophy. I don't know how much he's into it, but he has. Most people will know that are probably listening to this podcast will know an objectivist philosophy through the eyes of the BioShock games. Though that is a critical look at it. So you can't, basically you can't judge too much based on the critics' visualization of an objective philosophy. Yeah. I do not subscribe to objectivist philosophy. I find it interesting. But one of the things about objectivism is individual liberty and the rights of the individual. And there's this kind of undertone of the individual must look out for the individual, right? Like that is a key good. And again, I'm not an objectivist, so I apologize if I get some of this philosophy wrong. And I don't want to be offensive to those who like this philosophy, but that's an interesting philosophy in normal life. Like the objectivism very much subscribes to the great man philosophy. This person will create something great through looking out for their own interests and preserving their individual liberties, and you will end up with these, monolith, these Walt Disneys, right? Are the objective philosophy kind of looks at this, and that's, there's some problems with that in my kind of moral philosophy when you look at just normal individuals. When you add in superpowered individuals, it's a really interesting way to look at people with superpowers. When Superman, individual, like what is best for Superman becomes a theme in a Superman film, you then have a huge contrast between how we view Superman and how he's being viewed. And I remember when I watched Man of Steel and how bizarre the moment was where Pa Kent would not allow Superman to come save him from a tornado because that would out Superman, and Superman had the right to not be outed. And Pa Kent gave his life to not have Superman have to save him, because Superman shouldn't have to save anyone by this philosophy. And I saw that scene. I'm like, this is the dumbest scene I've ever seen in a superhero movie of all time. And I have seen some I have seen the Roger Corman Fantastic Four. So that was the dumbest moment. I really like Superman. I like Pa Kent. I grew up with Lois and Clark, which has this kind of familial take on everything, and that's like my Superman, mixed with some stuff like Kingdom Come and the comics that were coming out. I'm not a huge comic nerd. This is why I'm not a true nerd. I haven't read a ton of comics. I've read Kingdom Come, which was really good, right? Because my friends who are nerds gave it to me and said, read this, All-Star Superman. Read this. This is a good Superman self-contained thing to read. But I do really like Superman. And it wasn't until I kind of started to get Snyder's aesthetic and his philosophy that scene made sense. And I hate the scene. But I'm so fascinated that it exists, right?
And the fact that there can be an underlying explanation for that scene, which so many people hated, and yet makes sense from this perspective, is another thing that fascinates me about, Snyder and his view on superheroes. The idea that, you take this thing and that you focus more on what is good for me rather than what is good for the world is an inherently bizarre way of looking at a superhero in the first place.
Yeah.
And the thing is, you can see that in, let's say, Iron Man 3, which is also very overtly about what is best for Tony Stark. Right?
Spider-Man 2, the original Spider-Mans, is another one asking this question.
How can you protect your life and your privacy and your well-being while also helping the world? And yet Snyder's answer to those questions are so wildly different from Spider-Man 2 and Iron Man 3 and all these other things.
It's amazing to me. Really fascinating. And it's like, I'm so glad these movies exist. I'm so glad that they exist. And I aesthetically, do I even say that word?
Aesthetically?
Aesthetically. I worry I say that word wrong.
I think everyone says that word wrong.
Okay, here's a tangent. The word I said wrong for the longest time was segue. So segue is, I thought everyone... So segue, there's a segue between, which, I didn't do. I just went straight into a different thing. So that word, there's a thing we call, Peter, my editorial director, talks about it. It's a reader first response, I believe, where you've read a word many times but never heard it spoken. I thought that when people wrote segue, they were writing a shortened version of it, like et al. Or etc. Because the word segue is spelled very strangely. It looks like half a word. It comes from French. It's not a normal sort of thing. And so I always would say the word seg because I saw seg and I'm like, that's short for segue. It's like etc. No, Brandon, the word segue is spelled segue, and you've just been sounding like a doofus for the last 35 years or whatever it is till I figured it out.
But that is such I was a big reader as a kid kind of thing. Because if you read books constantly and you read these words but you've never heard them pronounced, you get that. For me, I thought that epitome was spelled E-P-I-T-A-M-Y, and that the actual word epitome was pronounced epitome, and it referred to something else. Like, I had no clue how those connected in any way.
Yeah. So, back on topic slightly. So, what do you think about this idea of recutting something that's already been made? And let me give you some context for this.
Okay.
Second book of Stormlight. Again, this is the Book of Endless Pages. At the end, I had a character make a decision. I won't spoil things here. This will be non-spoiler. Even when we talk about pop culture, we'll try to not spoil things unless it's like more than 5 years old or something like that.
Is that our statute of limitations?
Let's make that our statute of limitations. And so anything, I'm not a serial killer you can spoil. I guess we could spoil this because it's our own work, but I'm not going to spoil this.
Man, 5 years ago was 2016. That's perverse.
Yes. Oh, yeah. We are old, Dan. We are... There's a podcast name. We are old.
We are old.
And grouchy about it.
Is Get Off My Lawn a podcast name?
we ought to look and trademark that one. So Birds of Radiance, like all the Stormlight books, have taken me a little bit by surprise. Not anymore, but so this was the time when my fame was rising exponentially still, right at the end of the exponential rise, right? The Wheel of Time had come out, and I'd released the first Stormlight book in the middle of the Wheel of Time. And, my sales were going from opening week of 1,000 copies or two to an opening week of hundreds of thousands of copies, right?
Yeah.
And because of this, the publishers were moving up release dates and pushing me to release the book sooner. And we did not have a good balance on this. Words of Radiance is the book where famously Peter got dehydrated working on the copy edit and worked so long that he collapsed and was taken to the hospital for fluids.
Holy
right?
crap. I did not hear that. How did I not know that?
Yeah. So none of us understood, like, we could very easily have fallen into crunch mentality. And afterwards, Radiance, I instituted that nobody works more than 8 hours a day unless they get permission from us. And if you are consistently working more than 8 hours a day, something's wrong with the job, and we need to get you assistant or find less to do, right?
Yeah.
No one in the company is allowed to work more than 8 hours a day except me without permission. And we instituted that, so I didn't have to worry about people going to the hospital. But regardless, there was a huge flurry of things happening in the revisions, and I went back and forth on a thing I made at the ending, and we turned the book in, and I immediately regretted it. Like, that was the wrong ending. I should have done the other one. And it hummed and hawed, and the books were printed and things, and then I finally said, no, let's change it back. Change it for all future printings. Change it for the ebook. I want to go back to the other ending. And it created this issue where my fans are like, but what's the canon ending? I have a first printing. Now the ending is changed. And it was really confusing and a kind of a huge problem, even to this day, that I changed. Nobody lived that died or died that lived, but I changed a big part of what a character did.
Yeah.
And to this day, that's haunted me a little bit. In the part of me wants to make that a common thing where I'm like, it's been 20 years. There are some huge flaws in these books. Let me tell you about the worst one. Here's another tangent. Worst flaw. So in Mistborn, like, the grim dark movement in fantasy was very much at its height when I was writing the Mistborn. And I'm not very grim dark, but it's a darker book for me. And I was creating this world, and I wrote this thing where, see if I want to say it delicately. The nobility considered the lower classes disposable in ways that I look back and now find uncomfortable. Right? And it actually, specifically kind of how they treat people who are crossbreeds between a nobleman and a non-noble, and even the potential that might happen regarding that. There are just some things that I look back and I'm like, and even soon after I'm like, that was the grimdark influence getting me. This actually makes no sense. Like, in the books, they hunt down the children of crossbreeds and they kill them, right? Well, the children of crossbreeds might have superpowers that you can then canonically in the books give to one of your friends through a kind of horrific rite, but you can do. They should be watching these people to make use of them. It's terrible in a different way, but so there's both a lore reason that it should be changed, and also me saying that book didn't need that. It makes me uncomfortable now. Every time I think about it, and I have ever since like a year after the book came out, I'm like, I don't like that. Yeah. I would like to rewrite the books to take that out.
So you want to do the special edition Star Wars version of Mistborn?
Yeah, I'd like to do the special edition Star Wars version of Mistborn that I think is taking out something that, in retrospect, is actually a little cringy. And you know, the Mistborn also has a big problem in that, for those who haven't read it, I have a character manifest a new power at the end of the first book. There's something I was planning to use in the second book. Moshe said the ending needs more oomph, and so I drew this thing and put it in. I didn't need it. I could have forced myself to stretch. It's how I came up with Sanderson's first law, is that I did this and regretted it. And so the ending has this little thing that's kind of a flaw, but this is the series that people most often read to find out what kind of writer I am. Like, there are these two things that really bug me about this series. Should I change it? And the answer seems to be no. But what's your opinion? Like,
well, I mean, the answer, I think, has to include, when are you going to stop? You will always, I assume, continue improving as a writer, and you will continue learning things about yourself and about the world. Your opinions about what is cringy and what is not will continue to evolve. And so, you know, you rewrite Mistborn now, and then do you find yourself rewriting it again in 20 more years?
Maybe. Is that a bad thing?
I don't know.
I mean, Disney went back, and I'm really glad that they cut out the super racist section of Fantasia.
Aladdin?
No, of Fantasia. The racist section of Aladdin is nowhere near as super racist as the one of Fantasia, which is just a thing that, you know, it's in the centaur scenes. They have a black centaur as a servant to the other centaurs, playing comic relief.
Yeah.
In ways like the whole thing is just super bad.
Yeah. And a very old style, like
minstrel show,
blackface cartoon kind of thing.
It's like it's super bad. This isn't a leftist rightist thing. Everybody I know who sees that is like, whoa.
Yeah, regardless of your political affiliations.
I love Fantasia. I really like it. I'm sure glad I can have a copy of that just doesn't have it in there anymore. And yes, it's revisionist history a little bit and things like that. But you know what? I'm just glad that they could go and make a few snips and like.
Well, and now that we've raised this specter, we're getting into the whole current conversation about Dr. Seuss and everything else.
Which I think is too political for how I want this podcast to go. So maybe we'll veer away from that, but just talk about it as artists. What do you think about recutting your work?
So, yes, like, I don't know. It would be easy for me to have a better opinion on this if I could point to something that was changed rather than merely quote unquote censored.
Yeah.
And is now better for it.
Snyder Cut, I think, is better for this expansion. And having seen it, like, mixing Joss Whedon with Zack Snyder aesthetic was just a terrible idea.
Yeah.
Just awful. It's I mean, it's overly long. But I mean, I'm calling the kettle black, right? Like, you know what? Maybe it
people
could be
who write 400,000 word books don't get to make fun of 4-hour movies. I
do not at all. And so maybe it's a little overlong. And again, I don't like his aesthetic. I don't like his artistic taste. I don't like his artistic take on superheroes. But I find it fascinating. And I, as a consumer and as a person who likes art, am super glad that the Snyder Cut exists. I think it is much improved. I am glad he got a chance to create his vision for this thing. And this is a net positive in so many ways.
I agree with you. And like I said, even without having seen the movie, just purely as a cultural artifact, I am glad that it exists. I am glad that an artist was given this kind of freedom.
My respect for Zack Snyder went through the roof because of this whole thing. Because I knew, for instance, I think we mentioned earlier, he didn't take a salary. He just wanted to create this thing, and he wanted to kind of look back at it and say, hey, this is what I wanted to do. And watching it, I'm like, I get it. I get you better, man. I understand your artistic style better, and good job.
Yeah, and so I think for me, where I land on this is that this is a weird corner case, right? Because it doesn't happen often that an auteur is forced to step away from a passion project and then, has the need or the opportunity to go back and fix it.
I mean, it happened to Blade Runner, right? Though there's Blade Runner might be arguing the other direction because there's 7 cuts of Blade Runner and
so many different versions of Blade Runner.
The artist who made that has some interesting comments about Blade Runner. This is Ridley Scott.
Well, and going back to the similar era, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. There's 3, if not 4, different cuts of that.
Yeah.
Spielberg's kind of personal favorite cut does not work for me because it has the whole sequence inside the spaceship that I don't think lands properly.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. Though I prefer the director's cut of The Abyss. Right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of nice. I feel like Lucas earned this whole thing a ton of badwill by doing one thing really wrong, which is just not making the originals available.
Yeah.
If the originals were available and you could choose which one to watch, then I don't think that people would have this whole he Lucased it. And that was my worry when I was doing Words of Radiance. Am I Lucasing this? Right?
Well, and we have to talk about Lucas when we talk about an artist going back to fix their stuff, because the special editions are such a big deal. And the thing is, I would say 70 to 80% of the changes he made were fantastic.
Yeah, I actually have had this argument with people before, because I don't like the special editions, but most of it's really good.
Yeah.
And the stuff you don't notice is good, and the stuff you do notice tends to be bad.
All of the background of Bespin stuff is so good. Cloud City is so much more visually interesting and believable now than it used to be.
He went a little overboard with the same thing outside the cantina at Mos Eisley. Just a little overboard.
The musical number?
No, that one's way over. No,
yeah,
I'm talking about
way over the top.
Like the city itself.
Walking
in, little overboard instead of just background
bit,
stuff.
But not to the point that it bothers me. So most of the special editions, what I would love, and this will never happen, but what I want is the DVD where in the menu you get to pick. Just check the box. I want to see all the Cloud City stuff. I don't want to see the stupid Han and Jabba scene in New Hope. Cut out this, keep this, let Han shoot first. Pick and choose your ideal personal version of the special editions. But that is impossible. I mean, technologically, it is doable. But the thing is, I was reading about this just the other day. Lucas was so kind of zealous in his destruction of the originals that they are incredibly hard to find non-special editions of any good video quality anywhere.
I've heard that as well. It exists somewhere, because he also didn't throw stuff away. You know that guy is the one who has...
Yeah, there's a vault somewhere in Skywalker Ranch.
Yeah. He's the type that you pull up in the drawer, and he has the bags he went shopping in 1993 and is going to use them someday. But that's our podcast, guys. That is the Brandon and Dan. We don't still have a name.
We still don't have a name.
We'll come up with a name next time. How about that?
Awesome. Let's do it.
All right. Thank you guys for listening. We have no outro.
Goodbye.